Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. Lots of good suggestions this go around, so I haven't really had to go back in time to go look at some of the past suggestions. It seems like a lot of them are just coming from this one here. So thank you so much, and please keep them coming. I'll be doing more of these videos throughout the next few weeks as well. This entry is interesting because it pretty much only has one encounter, something that happened there in Indiana in the late 1800s, but to this day it's still chronicled here and there throughout various websites and then other places that talk about this very unique experience. What it is still up for the debate as to exactly what this creature was. There are some theories associated with it, and I'll give my own thoughts on it here too in a minute, but it's very brief when it comes to the info provided because it was just one single encounter. But it has to do with this. It's still fascinating nonetheless. It's known as the mud mermaids, these creatures, in other words, there in Indiana. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the brief but fascinating info associated with this very unique encounter. So what were these mud mermaids? Well, that's the colloquium. There's no official other name associated with them, but they were a pair of amphibious creatures that were encountered in the late 1800s there in a place called Vevey, which is a location in Indiana. And if you wanted to go even more specific, you have to go down by the Ohio River towards a county called Switzerland County. And there's various dates, two of them at least, that I could find associated with this encounter. In fact, there was one that apparently occurred back in 1891, October to be specific, at least with one reported instance. And then there's another one that may have happened in 1894, but it could be the same exact encounter, just different dates. So different places describing different dates, in other words. But still, if you go by the late 1800s, that's probably the best way to chronicle this. And there, that's what this occurred. By the way, this information comes from two newspapers somewhere in Ohio, no less, that started reporting on this. So this is what was described. There on the banks of the Ohio River, these quote-unquote mud mermaids were found. They were there just basically up by a sandbar near the river, presumably dead. Like they were just there, almost like carcasses, and here's how they were described. And this is according to a newspaper. I don't know if it's still there today or if this was just then back then in the late 1800s. It was known as the Cincinnati Enquirer. But here's how they were described. These creatures were about 5 feet in length, and they had a yellowish type color associated with them. And then they had these appendages or something else resembling hands. And then these hands were just webbed, and then they had these very sharp claws at the end of it. And the way it was further described was everything in terms of the top of the head had no hair, but it was definitely like a humanoid type face. Not 100% humanoid, but pretty close to what you could describe in terms of human features. And these human-like faces had no hair at all, but they had these weird dog-like ears. So take that for what you will. Here you had something with the bottom, in this case of like a mermaid, large fins or large something like a large tail, and then the top part of it was far more humanoid with these hands and claws, and then the human-like face, and then everything else I described as well. But that's how they were found. They were found there on the shores, just dead, and then afterward, I don't know exactly what happened to those carcasses, but they were there, and then that was in the end of it. Nobody seemed to, I guess, take any claim to these bodies, or who knows, these might have been actually bodies that were alive, but then they were just in some kind of stasis. But such is the case here. When they were found, that's how they were described in that area. Now, as far as the interpretations of what these creatures are, it all depends really on what people stated afterward. So many explanations associated with this brief encounter, but at the end of the day, it's all up to debate. There's the idea that it's a cryptid, a whole new cryptid that's only encountered once and hasn't been seen yet again. There's another idea that it's like another type of evolutionary type lizard, something else, some amphibious creature that has just become discovered for the first time during that time period, and it just happens to be something that is real, like a real life animal, but it's just completely on its own, like nothing else like it in the world. We just barely discovered it at that point. Or it could be something, this is, and this is my opinion, it could be something more on the lines like it was a decomposed creature, and the way it was decomposed, it just created that weird look that happened to be more on the lines of, in this case, a human-like mermaid type fish. The reason I mentioned that one is because a lot of the carcasses, the globsters that are out there in this world, a lot of them have actually been identified as real life creatures, known creatures, in other words, like sharks or whales, something along those lines. But because of the way that these things decompose, and then the way they just bloat, and then the way that the carcass just moves about, it creates like a weird, whole new, out of this world creature from those decomposing bodies. They look nothing, in other words, like the original. And so when people see them, they think that it's an entirely new creature from another realm. But it's not. It's actually just a real life animal. That's just the way the state of decomposition. It just created something that looks completely different. That's at least my opinion. When I was reading this information, that's the first thing that came to mind when I was hearing these descriptions. Like the notion of dog-like ears. It could be some flaps of skin that just suddenly, in the way that things were decomposing, made it look, just by pure happen chance, like it's something along the lines of ears. Same thing with those fins or those appendages, whatever those are. That's where it makes it look like that. Such was the case of the monster Montauk, another one that I chronicled in one of my earlier videos, how it turned out to be nothing more than presumably some kind of raccoon. And so that's, but the way it looks, that's why people described it as something else completely different when it was in its decomposing state. But that's pretty much it. Not much else associated with these set of creatures because of such a brief encounter, but they've been chronicled here and there. Various websites are out there, such as Weird Ohio, that was talking about it. I was looking up more information too. It could be something more like there was a book I read called saw a picture of called Cryptids of Indiana as well, that it was chronicled there too. There's also this notion when I was posting all these and finding all these pictures of in this case the location there, Vevey, back in the 1800s. I noticed that there were multiple floods within that area, huge floods too, floods that basically drowned out large parts of that location, of that town and other surrounding areas. So it gave me the idea that maybe this creature, if instead it's truly a huge, like in this case, a new creature of sorts that has never been found before, it could have come from these floods. Because all of a sudden here you have this location by the Ohio River, and the Ohio River just flooding over completely, like floods of the century, bringing about this creature for the first time there. It could be that as well. And then when I was reading the information for it, I kind of tied it into these major floods that seem to be occurring several times there by that location. But what do you guys think as far as the mud mermaids, these strange human-like amphibious creatures found there in this case Vevey, over by the Ohio River? Anyone else have any more information? Anything else I might have missed? Maybe there was another interesting thing or another encounter that occurred afterward. If this is just the sole one, so be it. But if there's another encounter out there that I might have missed, then please post those comments below. Anybody from that area too, that knows more info, that maybe family members or someone else that happens to live there, if you know more info on that too, then please post those comments. And then you have my theory on there too, that it could just have been a decomposing creature, that another globster of sorts that may have been misidentified, in this case as mud mermaid. So, but yes, please post those comments below. Thanks again, everybody. Take care.